All right, so those 3 people that did make resolutions, oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Now I feel really bad because I'm going to pick on you. But would you like to share your resolution?
Yeah, I decided not to eat sweets.
Nice. Very good. Very healthy.
Well, I'll say that. I ate chocolate today. I had cake today. Broke my resolution today.
So it's been broken already. What is it, day 4? Okay. But at least you made those first 3 days. That's something. That's normally the case actually with resolutions, that they are broken very quickly. So I just thought I would share with you, because we're all friends, I thought I'd share with you my resolutions for 2017. So my first resolution is the resolution that I make every year, and that is to chant Krishna's names with more attention. And specifically, I said that I'm going to chant at least 8 rounds before I go to work, and I'm also not going to look at my phone when I'm chanting Hare Krishna. Because little did I know that WhatsApp was going to be a greater distraction for my spiritual life than lust, greed, and envy. Very painful. My second resolution is to help more in the kitchen, because according to my wife, my track record is not very good. So I'm going to be cooking for Krishna. That is the plan. You're all welcome to come round and taste it, but probably you want to wait for later in the year till my cooking skills are slightly better. And finally, and most importantly, I've decided that I want to find my Dharma and live my Dharma. And when I wrote this down on the piece of paper, I thought that this looked really, really good. I mean, it was the most impressive. You know, chanting attentively, nice, and obviously essential for spiritual life. Cooking with the wife, nice for her. And but finding my Dharma, that was the one when I thought when people come up to my man cave, my loft, and they see that on the wall, they're going to say, wow, Nandagopa, now that is a resolution. The only problem is, I don't really know what it means. What I think it means is trying to understand my psychophysical nature, understand what part of me cannot be taken away, what part of me I can really engage those skills and talents in Krishna's service. But instead of me speculating, I thought, much better, why don't I hear from the subject expert, His Holiness Śivarāma Swami. Haribol. So Maharaj has been practicing Krishna consciousness for over 40 years. He was originally born in Hungary, and his family emigrated to Canada. He's been preaching around the world. He's been in America, been in Canada, in the UK, and then most recently, his major project has been back in Hungary, where he set up a self-efficient, self-sustaining farm in Hungary. And it's actually such an amazing place. It's actually a tourist attraction. So people actually go there, especially to see it. And it's amazing. It's absolutely fantastic. So one of the things that Maharaj is working on there is to create a society based on the principles that are set out in the Vedas, namely Varṇāśrama. And Maharaj will be doing a 45-minute presentation just explaining what that means in practice. Because we may have some understanding of what these eternal principles are and how they applied 5,000 years ago. But the reality is that right here, right now, 2017, when each of us are doing our own Varna, our own job, the question is, how are we meant to engage that in Krishna's service? So the idea is that Maharaj will enlighten us on this topic, and then we'll have 15 minutes of Q&A. And then Maharaj is also world-renowned for his kirtan. So we'll get to hear the holy names from a pure devotee. So we're going to warm Maharaj in the usual way. There's enough friendly faces here that have been to a program before. So I think you know the standard. If you don't know it, just follow along. I love this bit. This is my favorite bit. You ready? Haribol! 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 His Holiness Śivarāma Swami Maharaj ki.
You can see the topic here, which is entitled The Qualification for Varṇāśrama. And I may not get so far into this topic as the way Nandagopal led you to believe I was going to, for some of the reasons that I'll explain here. An introduction to who here is hearing this word Varṇāśrama for the first time, just to give us a little idea of, we've got a good number. and who has heard the word but isn't necessarily clear about what it means. Okay, we've got another few. So, we're the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, and Srila Prabhupada gave that name to the movement that he founded 50 years ago. And interestingly, that when Srila Prabhupada established ISKCON, it was done in a very, well, just the same way as you establish a legal entity nowadays, in a legalistic way. On the other hand, we should see that it was a spiritual activity, a spiritual entity, which is actually really being transposed to this material world. While we have such things as organized religions here around the world, and there are many. Here we have the Anglican Church, and there's a Catholic Church, and so many different religions which are legally structured and have both a traditional and a legal identity. When Srila Prabhupada also legally established the Krishna consciousness movement, he wasn't simply putting some thoughts to, I just need to keep track on time. Okay, he wasn't putting just thoughts onto paper and then having that being legally established. Srila Prabhupada was actually transposing a spiritual reality that exists in the spiritual world. I was speaking with, this morning I was speaking with some devotees in Cardiff, and they were a little upset to find out that the spiritual world was organized, hierarchical, and very structured, and there was no anarchy over there. And the spiritual world actually has a social structure. There are people there. When people work together in an organized way, that's called a society. So what is the organization that actually characterizes the spiritual world? And then when I talk about spiritual world, I mean Golokanam, Nijdam, Itali, Chatasya, Golokadam, Haridam, Vaikuntha. The spiritual structure is overall the same. It's called Varṇāśrama. That there are different devotees who, according to the different types of services that they perform there, that's called Varna, and who live in different types of spiritual orders called ashrama, together, although they're fully transcendental to all types of designations, but nonetheless, they function in a certain social form, a social format. That society there is called Varṇāśrama, and when Srila Prabhupada established the Krishna consciousness movement, what he was actually doing is transposing or bringing down, like we use this word avatar, bringing down that same spiritual structure here into the world, and he called it the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So it may look like another organized religion, but actually it's the way the spiritual world functions. And like other things that are connected to Krishna consciousness, it's perfect. Which also may be a real revelatory thing for those of you who have been in ISKCON for any length of time, that ISKCON is perfect. Just like the Hare Krishna Mahamantra is perfect. Unfortunately, even though the Mahamantra is perfect, many people don't chant it perfectly, and therefore they don't see the particular results that you expect to see, or those results that you read about in Shastra. Similarly, the Krishna consciousness movement is also perfect, except for one slight problem, and that is its imperfect followers. I had here's my tissue. Okay. And it's the imperfect people, namely us, who are in this movement, which are unfortunately the main obstacle to the perfect functioning of this society. But in any case, it's a transcendental identity, and I'm just introducing that because we just finished celebrating the 50th anniversary of the incorporation of ISKCON. And I just wanted to highlight that ISKCON is not a material thing, so when devotees would ask, well, Srila Prabhupada, is there a ISKCON in the spiritual world? Prabhupada would say, well, why not? All of the spiritual world is ISKCON. It may not be called ISKCON. There's no nations there for T and international. This nationality thing is something that's a relatively modern idea. But there's no international, but there is a society for Krishna consciousness. And in any case, those same type of characteristics, namely people's engagement and people's spiritual order of life, social, spiritual orders, they're also transposed here into this material world. And they give a facility, just like Prabhupada established ISKCON, for what purpose? Well, he listed 7 purposes, but all of those purposes were for one thing, really. And that was to elevate people and bring them to the platform of perfection. Similarly, when you just you need to have more than just a religion or an organized religion in order to develop a society. Generally, religions are just a part of society. But what is the overall fabric or structure of society which permeates your eating, sleeping, recreation, work, the type of work you do, education, your economic system, your political structure? That's going beyond just religion, and that's going just beyond a religious organization. It then means actually a spiritual society. And Varṇāśrama is that spiritual society which is different than the social structures that we see in the world in the present time, which all generally have one thing in common, and that is that they have no idea of what the purpose of the human form of life is. And because they don't, whatever type of ideologies they may represent and whatever good intentions they may have, ultimately they fail to elevate people, but ultimately end up degrading them. So we live in a society today, you're all working, engaged in different types of work, in a society that Ishopanishad calls a soul-killing society. Srila Prabhupada would use this same word. We're part of a social structure which, because it can't elevate its members, ultimately it degrades them. So I think everyone here who's just in the little older sections, you've seen a lot of those things for yourself. So we may be under the misconception, or sometimes we may like to think that we're going in a positive direction, but if you read the news, and if you live in this world, and if you're a little objective, then there's no way you can say things are getting better. Things aren't getting better psychologically, they're not getting better ecologically, they're not getting better economically, they're not getting better sociologically. There's a certain strata of super wealthy people who are getting wealthier, but it's at the cost of destroying this planet, destroying people, fueling wars, and so many other things. Anyway, but that's not what we're going to be talking about. So what is this social structure? And I'm not even going to get into describing what it is. That's another issue. But everything, as you can see here, requires a qualification. Hello. Here it is, qualification. And here are the few points that will go through this slide, relatively brief slide presentation. And then if you have any particular questions, then I'd be happy to address those, either those that relate to this presentation or otherwise, some that are sort of periphery to it. Everything requires a qualification. You didn't get to university from grade school. You have to have a qualification. The qualification is you have to go through high school or college, you have to have a certain type of diploma. That's called qualification. Similarly, in order to be able to, for instance, learn music, play music, you have to be able to read music. That's the qualification. In order to be able to cook, well, you have to know the basics of cooking. So qualification is always a prerequisite for doing anything. In order to ride a bike, you have to be able to keep your balance. If you can't keep your balance, if you can't walk in a straight line, don't try sitting on a bike. So it won't work. So similarly, in order to drive a car, you have to have a driver's license. So this is called qualification. And this is what we're going to start on, is that every practice requires a certain type of qualification. Similarly, in order to be qualified for a social structure, you also have to be qualified. There requires a certain type of qualification. You want to be a UK citizen, you have to do something to get a passport. You have to have certain qualifications. Now, I don't know what the details of those qualifications are going to be nowadays, but I know when I was coming to the UK and I had a Canadian passport, and at a certain point I was trying to apply for a UK residency. I had to stay 9 months non-stop in the UK for I don't know how many years, one after the other, and I couldn't do that because I would always be going to India every 6 months or so. So that was the qualification. There requires qualification for everything. So in Srimad Bhagavatam, Krishna tells Uddhava the following. Oh, have we got another microphone just to make this a little more? You got one, Nandagopal? Or some? Is there another mic? Okay. You can read English okay? Or you'll do it? But then you have to be here. So what's on the screen when I tell you, you read it. If you just sit down over there, and that's it. Careful. Okay, go ahead.
Steadiness in one's own position, one's own qualification, is declared to be actual piety, whereas deviation from one's position, one's own qualification, is considered impiety. In this way, the two are definitely ascertained.
So this idea of doing what you're qualified for is called dharma, and doing something that you don't have the qualification for is called adharma. Literally, this is what's stated. And the word here for qualification is a word that you may know. It's called adhikar. For instance, when grihastas particularly have the name adhikari, Prabhupada gave them the word adhikari. So Krishna Das, adhikari. Adhikari means that they have the qualification for devotional service. Despite the fact that if someone is married, we want to make it very clear that in Krishna consciousness, marriage is not a sign of a fall down or a weakness, but we want to explain that this is actually a qualification for spiritual life. Therefore, they're called adhikaris. Another verse, which Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, go ahead.
From animal life to human life, and from regulative principles to attachment, there are many levels of qualification, adhikar. The performance of duties according to a person's qualification is called piety, and deviation from those duties is called impiety.
This is Bhaktivinoda Thakur's own explanation of the previous verse in his book called Krishna Sandarbha. So you can see he's talking about from animal life to human life, and from regular principles of attachment to transcendental spiritual life. There are different types of qualification. Just like children have a certain type of qualification for going to grade school, they have a different qualification for going to high school, a different qualification for going to university, to have a master's degree, PhD, and so on. So, and the qualification for one varies from that of the other. So it's clear here that everyone requires to have a certain type of qualification.
The qualification for following Varṇāśrama is to cultivate the qualities of human beings.
So what's the qualification for Varṇāśrama? What's the qualification for this social structure? Well, the answer is you have to be a human being. That just doesn't mean you got 2 arms and 2 legs. That doesn't necessarily make you a human being. Because the qualification of a human being is not physiognomy. The qualification for a human being is conduct. What type of qualities do you possess? So just like a student, the qualification of a student is not age. How old are you? Oh, I don't know, 17, 18 years old. Okay, you can go to university. Well, do you know how to add? You know how to read? You know how to subtract? Have you passed your... No, it's not enough that you just have the age. So similarly, the body is not sufficient to qualify someone as a human being. So the qualification for following the Varṇāśrama is to have the qualities of human beings. That's how you recognize whether someone's a human or not. Okay, and what are the qualities?
These are the general principles to be followed by all human beings. O King Yudhishthira, these 30 qualifications must be acquired in the human form of life. Simply by acquiring these qualifications, one can satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
I'm not going to get into this in too much depth, and previously, maybe last time, I gave a presentation on these 30 qualities. I will go over them because they're essential, but here you can see that this is Narada Muni talking in the Bhagavatam. And he talks about 30 qualifications must be acquired in the human form of life. And he keeps repeating it. By acquiring this, the general principles must be followed. So there are certain qualities that qualify a person to actually be a human being. When you're a human being, you can talk about Dharma. Until then, there's no question of Dharma. And
these qualities are 30 in number and include the 9 limbs of bhakti.
So the 30 are divided into 2 divisions. 21 we can call sort of religious qualities: cleanliness, purity, austerity, simplicity. And the 9 are the 9 activities of devotional service: Shravanam, Kirtanam, Smaranam, Vishnu Pada Sevanam. In other words, human being has to be both religious and he also has to practice devotional service, same way that we practice it. They may practice it in different ways. Some people practice it with full faith, some people with less faith, some people with no faith. But human beings, in some way or another, should be connected to the principles of devotional service. And then, what are these 30 qualities? Well, we'll just go through them briefly.
These are the general principles to be followed by all human beings: truthfulness, mercy, austerity, observing fast on certain days of the month, bathing twice a day, tolerance, discrimination between right and wrong, control of the mind, control of the senses, non-violence, celibacy, charity, reading of scripture, simplicity, satisfaction, rendering service to saintly persons, gradually taking leave of unnecessary engagements.
Go ahead.
Observing the futility of the unnecessary activities of human society, remaining silent and grave and avoiding unnecessary talk, considering whether one is the body or the soul, distributing food equally to all living entities, both men and animals, seeing every soul, especially in the human form, as part of the Supreme Lord.
This is the 21 religious. Now comes the 9 spiritual.
Hearing about the activities and instructions given by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the shelter of the saintly persons, chanting about these activities and instructions, always remembering these activities and instructions, trying to render service, performing worship, offering obeisances, becoming a servant, becoming a friend, and surrendering one's whole self. O King Yudhishthira, these 30 qualifications must be acquired in the human form of life. Simply by acquiring these qualifications, one can satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
So, there's a list of 30 here. You can see where they're from. Srimad Bhagavatam, 7th canto, 11th chapter. It's worthwhile to actually apply, to study these, apply ourselves to them, meditate on them, cultivate them, analyze, see to what degree do we actually possess these qualities. And of course, it's something that really needs to be taught. It needs to be taught starting with children, because the essence of not just Varṇāśrama, but the essence of Vedic culture, spiritual culture, Krishna consciousness, is emphasizing to the first generation, namely children, and continuing that emphasis throughout life, that it's much more important who you are than what you are. I spent 18 years in educational institutions. No one ever emphasized to me that it was important who I was. It was just important what I was. I can't say I received the same type of emphasis at home, but certainly no one looked favorably when I came to the realization that who I was meant that I was a Hare Krishna. That was too much who I was. But the emphasis in our culture, when I say our culture, I mean our Vedic spiritual culture, Brahmachari, Gurukule, Vasadanto, Gurur, Hitan, starts with personal development. In Bhagavatam, you won't even find any emphasis on any type of vocational training. That's down the line. That's fine. Everyone can learn something in order to make a living. But the real essence of life will depend upon who you are. Can you please the Supreme Personality of Godhead? You can only please Him if you're a good person. You can't please Him otherwise. He doesn't need money. He doesn't need your work. There's nothing that you can give Him because everything's already His. So, but what you can please Him with is devotion or by pious activities. And those are performed by good people. So the basis of Vedic culture and the basis of Varṇāśrama starts off with people have to be good. Unless you're good, you're not a human being. And we read Mahabharata, Ramayana, they're full of stories of Rakshasas, Yakshas, and so many other living beings. They also look like us, but they don't fall into the category of human beings. They have a different name. Why? Because they're not good people. So the whole idea is how to actually be a good person. And when you're a good person, one can satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And these two things are there. One is a certain type of lifestyle, a lifestyle which is underpinned by these pious activities, pious religious activities such as what you've lived here, and which is also characterized by a spirit of devotion, which means a life based on pleasing and knowing the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Krishna summarizes some of these qualities also to Uddhava.
Non-violence, truthfulness, honesty, desire for happiness and welfare of all others, and freedom from lust, anger, and greed constitute duties for all members of society.
When did you ever learn in school that you have to be free from lust, anger, and greed? If you were free from lust, anger, and greed, this whole society would implode overnight. Because it's just fueled by that. If there's no lust, anger, and greed, there's no advertisement, there's no consumer products, there's no computers, we don't need all of this kind of things. Of course, we're using them in Krishna's service, but this is what this whole world, this is what's making this whole world spin around. Lust, anger, and greed. But Krishna says, no, the duties for all members of society, for all human beings, is to be free from lust, anger, and greed.
Those who do not cultivate these qualities and are outside Varṇāśrama Dharma and cannot understand the need for it.
Of course, in our politically social world, we don't like to use this, of course we don't like to use the word Varṇāśrama because it brings up the concept of the sort of perverted idea of the caste system, which is unfortunately really cast a very unfavorable shadow on the concept of Varṇāśrama. But also, we don't like this word outcast. Ooh, someone's cast outside of society. Anyway, this is the supreme authority speaking here, but he says, well, either you're in it or you're out of it. And being in it means that you have the qualities, and if you don't cultivate those qualities, you'll have other qualities, and that means that you don't really fit in to that social structure, which isn't that revolutionary, because we've got prisons that are just bulging with people who don't fit into society, because they don't fit into the social norms. It's just a question of where you draw the line. And if you draw the line over here, well, then you'd have to have a lot more prisons, or at least you'd have to say that there's a lot of other people who don't necessarily fit into human society. What are they? Then go ahead.
Dirtiness, dishonesty, thievery, faithlessness, useless quarrel, lust, anger, and hankering constitute the nature of those in the lowest position outside the Varṇāśrama system.
So there's such a thing as being in and out. Well, you have the qualification or you don't have the qualification. You don't have the qualification to be a neurosurgeon. Well, sorry, then you're out of the hospital. You can't be in. And it's not a personal thing, but qualification is what allows you to do something. Similarly, the personal qualifications is what determines whether someone is really eligible for Dharma, for Varṇāśrama.
Thus, the first step to Varṇāśrama is to know and cultivate these 30 qualities. Maharaj Yudhishthira said, "My dear Lord, I wish to hear from you about the principles of religion by which one can attain the ultimate goal of life, devotional service. I wish to hear about the general occupational duties of human society and the system of social and spiritual advancement known as Varṇāśrama."
Is this it? Yeah. So I'm just concluding with this and then leaving the rest to you if you have any questions on this, so we can pursue some other line of thought as well. But the idea here being is that when we talk about Dharma, when we talk about what's our nature, how can we dovetail on nature in Krishna's service, we need to come back to the beginning. And actually, in order to understand our Dharma, we need to really qualify, make sure that we're qualified. And if we're not, then as the statements were there before, you must have these qualities or you have to cultivate them. If we don't, we have to cultivate them. We have to acquire them. So there's no shame about that. We're in Kali Yuga. There's a lot of shortage on a lot of things. But there is a shame if we don't do something about it, if we don't actually cultivate these type of qualities. Simplicity is one. Or, for instance, living according to one's means, which is certainly not something that fits into a consumer society, where everyone should live according to what they need, as opposed to according to what they want. Because if everyone just lived by what they needed, well, because we need a lot less things than what we have, and certainly a lot less things than what we want. But the whole idea of the world around us is that everyone should continually want more and more. As soon as everyone stops wanting more and more, the raison d'etre of our whole social mechanism, our whole economic mechanism stops. We call it development, and then in some circles they want to call it sustainable development, but it's the same thing. Either you call it lust and greed or sustainable lust and greed, but it's still the same thing. So, but to actually really be a sane society and to enter into this real realm of Dharma, you can't just kick in the door. You have to have the qualification. It's like a club. You can't just kick in the door. They want to know, what's your name? Show the card. Show that you're qualified to be part of this, this club. So similarly, to be qualified for Sanatana Dharma, to be qualified for Varṇāśrama Dharma, and to be actually qualified to even understand, what is my Varna? Our Varna is not necessarily the work that we're doing. Our Varna is based upon guna karma, what our nature is. And Varna is not understood by self-analysis. Generally, it's understood by other people who know us, and that's the Vedic system. The Vedic system would be that if your father is a Brahmin, then at age 10, 12, 13, you sit down in front of the village panchayat with parents, guru, some other elders, and they test you. Have you got the qualifications of a Brahmin? If you're not, then whatever you have the qualifications for, that's what you are. So it's a rule of thumb. Narada Muni describes it in the Bhagavatam, yatyaya lakshanam proktam pungso varna viganjikam. You get a type of work and activity according to the qualities that you have. But prior to determining what the qualities of someone's Varna is, everyone has to have the qualities, or at least has to be working on the qualities of being a human being. And so these are really, really essential things as we're starting over here. Truthfulness. What was this new word for this age? Post-truth, isn't it? I mean, that's the last leg of Kali Yuga. Post-truth. In other words, there's no such thing as truthfulness anymore. No one's even expected to be truthful. Truthfulness, mercy. There's more plastic waste in the ocean by weight than there are fish. That's also connected to, obviously, to cleanliness and so on. But that's what we're doing to our world. It's what we're doing to our environment. It's what we're doing to future generations. It's what we're doing to other species that live in this world. More plastic than fish. It's phenomenal. So, qualification, and I'll stop there. And if anyone has any questions, I hope this was of some value today. I was also thinking of coming with something else, but since the little projector started to work, then I thought we'd just continue on with this. Hare Krishna.
So there was a lot of food for thought there. Some very deep topics. I just wanted to open up to the audience if anyone is brave enough to ask a question.
Scare them off like that. They're all brave.
Chaitanya is always brave.
If these qualities are the first, was it 21? Qualities come before the qualities of, like, devotional qualities. How?
They don't come before. They're all at the same time.
Oh, they're all at the same time.
There's 30 qualities.
Okay. So, well, my question was going to be about control of mind and control of senses. How is one able to do that if they're in the list of just sort of material qualities? How is one able to control the mind and control senses along with all the other, which seem material qualities? They seem
Why not?
material.
At least you learn a certain degree of mind and sense control. You teach it to children. You tell them, don't stick your hand in the fire, don't eat such and such things, eat at this, and it's just sense control. You don't necessarily have to be a transcendentalist to at least attain a certain level of mind and sense control. Obviously, to be fully sense-controlled, that requires further elevation, but these things have to be practiced, they have to be cultivated. And they have to be an integral part, these are prerequisites. Portia? Loudly.
You refer to the first 21 qualities as being religious, and then the next 9 as being spiritual. Could you define those two terms in context?
Religious means pious, good, but it doesn't necessarily mean spiritual. So you can have all these 21 qualities and not necessarily be spiritual. You're just a good person. So spiritual is when you know that you're not this body and that you're Krishna's eternal servant and you're trying to serve him. So we see that sometimes we meet some pious people in this world who don't have a clear concept of God or even their relationship with him, and yet they have these qualities, but it doesn't make them spiritual. So both are necessary. Ladies.
Well, I have a question, and you talked very much about how you should be as a human being. I wanted to ask, given what you were saying about the nature of our society and the ecological harm, would you say that in terms of the material work that devotees do to maintain themselves, they should not be doing work which itself contributes to material harm of the kind that you were mentioning?
Well, that would be an ideal situation. Obviously, devotees draw a line at a certain point. For instance, I don't know, very few devotees would become butchers or start off a chain of discos and pubs because they know that they're really sort of crossing the line. On the other hand, practically you can't extricate yourself from this world because anything that you do, at least outside in the professional world, is contributing to the demise of this planet. But then Srila Prabhupada, that's why emphasized for us that, well, why not stick to the very basics of life, which is learn how to feed yourself and live off the land, which is generally quite innocent and free from any of all of these repercussions. Innocent way of living and sustenance. You can feed yourself, you can live, and you don't have to be dependent on this whole society or be implicated in the consequences. And there is an implication. There is an implication in being connected with everything else that goes around in the world around us. So at least, therefore, one needs to really be well connected with Krishna in order to balance those things. Otherwise, then one becomes very much culpable for one's contribution. And well, not here, but I just met with some devotees a few hours ago, and I remember their son was working with, or started to, got a scholarship from British Aerospace, right? That's what it's called, which makes weapons. And he then realized that actually that's what he was going to get involved in. So he gave it up. He gave up the scholarship, and he was like, I don't know, 17, 18 years old. And then he went to the dentistry. And he spent 5 years in Budapest going to dentist school over there because he didn't want to get involved. He didn't want to be implicated. So, which was quite a act of integrity from a young man.
Maharaj, you were placing more emphasis on understanding or becoming qualified. Could you elaborate how does becoming qualified then reveal one's Varna?
this idea of revealing Varna, the Varnas of course is there, but the Varna is not necessarily revealed to you, or at least you may or may not, but the process is that it's given by others. So it's not an matter of self-assessment. It's a matter of accepting other people's understanding of where you're situated, because their perspective is more objective, more neutral, and from different angles of vision, whereas ours is certainly lacking in all of those different types of perspectives. But you need, because people need to become purified. You have to, we live in a world, we live in Kali Yuga, which is a mess. And everything and everyone in this world is a mess. So at least unless you put yourself in order, it becomes very difficult to really define what are the dominating forces, what are the dominating modes of nature, and swabhava, or the consequent nature, conditioned nature even of a living entity, unless you're in a purified state. And when you're not in a purified state, it's just like the murky water. You can't see anything in it. So you've got to get it clear. You've got to let the mud settle down. And when you cultivate these qualities, then things become clear. They become clear to others, and then they also become clear to you. Not only they become clear to you, but you then become qualified and capable of accepting who you are. Because otherwise the tendency is that we have all kinds of misconceptions about who we are based on who we'd like to be again, rather than what our real nature is. And finally, at the back of the room.
Just on that same topic.
Nice and loud.
On that same topic about who we'd like to be and who we are. At the moment, there's so many self-help books encouraging people to unlock their potential and so on. And I was just wondering how that relates to understanding Varna. And can somebody become a different Varna and develop and train into something? Or are they fixed in what they are and that stays the same throughout?
You have to develop your potential in who you are, not develop your potential and be someone else. So you don't need, I don't know, you don't need an unlimited number of engineers. You don't need an unlimited, just from a practical point of view, from a statistical point of view, it's not necessary. Neither do you need an unnecessary amount of overeducated people, because they don't know what to do with themselves, and they end up being unemployed. So we've got a lot of highly educated people because somehow or another, for instance, agriculture and being a farmer has gone out of vogue, just like being a housewife has gone out of vogue. It's become like a real bad word, or it's denigrating women if rather than being professionals, they're housewives. So the whole concept is, first of all, what is the structure of society? Who created society? How is society meant to live? And people should certainly perfect themselves. Krishna says, Atmopamyena sarva, so always striving for perfection. But within the field of endeavor, which is actually suitable both for them and both for society at large. It's a machinery. Society is like a mechanistic structure, and you take like a car engine. So you're going to give self-development, self-help courses to all the other parts of the engine so that they can all become wheels. You don't have a car anymore. All you got is a bunch of wheels. And a bunch of wheels don't get you anywhere. So every part has to be willing to play its particular role and be satisfied. A car only needs 4 wheels. And maybe you need a spare tire in case you get a flat, but that's all. You don't need 10 wheels for a car. And they don't go any faster either. So 4 wheels are enough, but you need to be qualified in order to accept that. and that we don't need excessive education, because excessive education does not necessarily make people better. It doesn't make them smarter, and it doesn't make society any more productive in the real sense of production, which is that it's able to produce people who are liberated and who are free from material contamination and who can go back to Godhead. Not people who are working themselves into a grave in anxiety, all in the name of so-called progress, just to go to hell.
Sometimes those decisions that people are making are based. Sometimes those decisions that people are making are based on what will earn them the livelihood that they need, or what there's a demand for in the market. So, whilst they may identify that this is what I am, there may not be a need for such a skill in the market. And
that they may not be a need for a market. You mean that you don't need a market for what you're living from, but you need to make a living?
Yeah, there may not be a demand for what you're good at.
Yeah. There may not be a demand, and ultimately there's not a demand, or there's not a need for a lot of things that we're good at. There's a need for food. Well, many of us aren't good at gardening or actually really producing food or milking a cow. We all want to drink milk, but if you only have a cow, will you know what to do with it and how to feed it and take care of it? So we're very good at some other things, but the basic things which life depends upon, we're not so good at. And therefore we've gotten ourselves in a situation where a very, very small minority of the people in this world are feeding us. And that's a very precarious situation, where your life depends upon, and it's not even what someone's feeding you here, but someone may be feeding you in Africa, or from South America, or for some other part of the world, and you don't even know what you're eating. But we're eating it, and it may be all kinds of carcinogenic things that they put in it to sell it as a nice looking product, but it's not even necessarily food. It may look good, but it may not be food. But as long as the new generation of the iPhone or computer comes out and that looks good, then that's progress. Anyway, but still, we need to live in this world, but we're living in a very complex and topsy-turvy world, because it's not going according to the structure and plan which the Creator gave this world. And unless we make some type of change, then the world won't be able to change. So at least the one world that we can change is our own world. And therefore it comes back to that. Let's start with actually cultivating the qualities that make people good. Should we stop there and chant a little? Anyway, we could go on, but I'm just looking at time, and
yeah, I think we should stop there.
Okay, good. Hare Krishna.
And just to clarify, the reason I said we should stop there is because I know how amazing it is when Maharaj leads kirtan, and I'm a little slow, Maharaj, so I was trying to follow everything you were saying, but in essence, what I got was that I'm not yet a human being. In order to be a human being, I need to develop a certain number of qualities, 30 in particular. And in order to develop those qualities and cultivate them, there's certain things that I can do. For example, I can tell the truth. I can try and not kill animals. I can try and fast on certain days. But more than that, I need to purify my heart. And I've been trying to do that for a number of years. But one of the most powerful ways that I've found is to hear the holy name when sung by someone who has genuine love for the Supreme Lord. So that was why I was very keen to end, because if, like me, some of that topic went over your head, just close your eyes, open your heart, and listen to Maharaj sing the holy names, and that will transform everything from within, and then we can deal with without. Hare Krishna.